She was somebody's mother, somebody's grandmother, a woman who looked out at the Arizona sky and felt nothing but gratitude for the life she had built. A woman who once sat across from her daughter at a table she had known her whole life in a restaurant that had stood in her city for over 100 years and said the words that so many people who love their lives never think to say out loud. It's so wonderful, just the air, the quality of life. It's laid back and gentle. Those were Nancy Guthrie's words, spoken on camera, spoken with the ease of someone who felt safe, someone who felt seen, someone who had no way of knowing that those words would one day be replayed by millions of people searching for a version of her they could hold on to. Because 3 months after she said them, Nancy Guthrie was gone. Taken from her home in the early hours of February 1st, 2026, in a quiet neighborhood in Catalina foothills, Tucson, Arizona, in the dark while the rest of the street slept. And the family she left behind, the children who carry her name, who carry her eyes, who carry the weight of every unanswered morning, has been living in a grief that has no edges, a grief with no funeral, no closure, no ending they can point to, only the ache of a chair that stays empty and a phone that never rings with her voice on the other end. They wrote it themselves, in their own words, released to the public because there was nothing else left to do but ask strangers for help. We miss our mom with every breath. We cannot be at peace until she is home. We cannot grieve. We can only ache and wonder. Read those words slowly. Let them land the way they were meant to land. We cannot grieve. We can only ache and wonder. There is a particular kind of suffering that comes with not knowing. It is different from loss. Loss, as devastating as it is, has a shape. You know what happened. You know where it ended. You can begin, however slowly, to find the edges of it. But not knowing whether someone you love is cold, whether they are frightened, whether they are calling out a name that no one can hear, that has no shape at all. It expands to fill every quiet moment, every meal, every night, every time the sun comes up and the world keeps moving as if nothing has changed. Cameron and Christine Guthrie wake up every day inside that feeling, and they have been waking up inside it for 53 days. Their mother was not a public figure. She was not famous. She was Nancy, a woman who loved Tucson the way people love the place that made them, who knew the restaurants, the streets, the particular quality of desert light in the early morning, who raised children who turned out to be the kind of people who stand in front of cameras and beg a city to help bring their mother home. That tells you something about who she was. You raise children like that by being a certain kind of person, patient, present, the kind of parent whose children, even as adults, still call, still visit, still want to sit across from at a table and share a meal. She was that person, and she is still out there somewhere, and her family has not stopped for a single day believing that she can be found. In the 53 days since Nancy disappeared, the Guthrie family has done everything a family can do. They have spoken to media, they have released statements, they have coordinated with investigators, they have kept the public engaged in a case that the news cycle, with all its relentless momentum, would otherwise have swallowed and forgotten. They have offered $1 million of their own money for information leading to Nancy's safe recovery. $1 million, not offered by a corporation, not offered by a foundation, offered by a family who loves their mother so much that they were willing to put everything on the table and say, someone out there knows something. Please help us bring her home. The FBI added $100,000 of their own. Tucson Crime Stoppers added $12,500 more. Together, more than $1.2 million sits waiting for anyone who comes forward with information. one of the largest reward packages in any missing person case in recent Arizona history. And as of this recording, it remains unclaimed. That detail is worth sitting with. $1.2 million, unclaimed. Either the person who knows something is the same person who took her, or the people around them are too frightened, too uncertain, or too unaware that what they know matters. If you are watching this and something has been sitting at the back of your mind since February, a detail that seemed small, a moment that felt slightly wrong, a conversation you half remembered and then set aside, please hear this. No detail is too small. It may be the key. The Guthrie family asked for exactly that. They asked the community of Tucson to search their memories, to go back through camera footage, journal notes, text messages, observations, conversations, not just from the night Nancy disappeared, but from weeks before. And that appeal was not made at random. In February 2026, when the FBI released images from Nancy's doorbell camera, the public saw one image that became the defining image of this case. A masked figure, full balaclava, gloves, tactical gear, a front holster with what appeared to be a handgun, a 25-liter backpack, moving directly and deliberately toward the camera, reaching up, covering it. That image is difficult to look at, not because it is graphic, but because of what it represents. Someone planned this. Someone stood at the door of a grandmother's home in the middle of the night with tactical equipment and a covered face and moved with the confidence of a person who had thought through every step, who knew where the camera was, who knew what time the street would be quiet, who knew exactly what they were doing. That is not random. That is not impulsive. That is someone who came prepared. But there was a second image. The same masked figure, the same balaclava, the same build, but no backpack, no visible weapon, no tactical gear, just a figure standing at the property, present, watching. A source familiar with the investigation told Fox News Digital that one of those images was taken on a different day, that the suspect may have come to Nancy's home before the night they took her, not to act, to observe, to learn. The sheriff's department initially called that speculative, and for weeks the investigation held its silence on the question of whether there had been a prior visit, whether someone had stood at that door before, whether Nancy had been watched. Then a date entered the conversation, January 11th. FBI agents returned to the Catalina Foothills neighborhood and began asking residents specific, precise questions. Not a general time frame, not sometime before February, one specific evening, January 11th. They asked neighbors to go back through their own camera systems to try to recall what they saw, what they heard, whether anything felt different that night. That level of precision does not come from speculation. It comes from evidence. It comes from something the investigation already holds and is working to corroborate. That something is the Nest camera data. Google had initially flagged January 11th as a possible date connected to the image of the suspect without the backpack. On the basis of that assessment, investigators began treating January 11th as a potential prior visit to the property. Neighbors were canvassed. The Guthrie family was informed of its significance. Then Google walked back its own finding. The company told investigators it could not definitively confirm the date, could not stand behind the timestamp. That is where the investigation might have stalled. That is where another case might have gone quiet. But then Pima County Sheriff Chris Nanos sat down for an interview with local Tucson station KLYD on March 23, 2026, and said something that no law enforcement official had said publicly since this investigation began. He said, "We do believe that something occurred on January 11th, and that is with the FBI's analysis of the equipment and digital stuff they have done." Read that carefully. Not Google's analysis, the FBI's, an entirely independent forensic examination, not of cloud metadata, but of the camera hardware itself, the physical device, the FBI's own technology, their own team, their own independent conclusion. Google flagged January 11th and then retreated. The FBI arrived at the same date through a completely separate process and has not retreated. One analysis pulled back, the other stands. The day before Sheriff Nanos gave that interview, the Guthrie family released their public statement. They asked the community to focus their attention not just on January 31st and the early hours of February 1st, the documented night of the abduction, but specifically on the late evening of January 11th. Families in active investigations do not point the public toward specific dates without coordination with the investigators working alongside them. Cameron and Christine Guthrie would not have asked Tucson to look back at January 11th unless law enforcement told them that night needed fresh attention. That family statement and the sheriff interview are not two separate developments. They are the same development, announced in sequence over 2 days, both pointing to the same night, both saying, quietly and clearly, something happened on January 11th, and we need to know what. If the FBI's conclusion is correct, if someone stood at Nancy Guthrie's front door on the evening of January 11th, then the picture of this crime shifts in a way that matters deeply. 3 weeks before the night she was taken, someone was there, without a weapon, without the backpack, without the full tactical gear that appeared on February 1st, just watching, standing in the dark at the door of a grandmother's home and learning what they needed to know before they came back. Former FBI agent Jennifer Coffendorfer described that visit as a trial run, a reconnaissance before the operation. Think about what that means for a moment. Someone chose Nancy Guthrie, specifically, deliberately, and then they came to her home 3 weeks in advance to make sure they had thought of everything. That is not the behavior of someone acting out of desperation or impulse. That is the behavior of someone who planned this crime the way you plan something you intend to get away with. And that longer planning window, those 3 weeks of prior movements, prior presence, prior exposure in the neighborhood, means more moments where this person can be placed, more opportunities for someone to have seen something, more chances that a camera caught a face, a vehicle, a direction of travel, more possibility that a detail someone has been carrying without knowing it matters is exactly the detail investigators need. If they were at that property on January 11th, their DNA may not have only been left on February 1st. In February 2026, Sheriff Nanos confirmed what investigators had been working to establish since the earliest days of the case. Unknown DNA, genetic material belonging to no one known to have had regular contact with Nancy Guthrie, had been found inside her home. He believed it could belong to the person who took her. But there was a complication. The sample was mixed. In forensic terms, a mixed DNA sample contains genetic material from more than one person. In a home where someone has lived, where friends have visited, where family has gathered, where the texture of a life has accumulated over years, that is not unusual. Surfaces carry history. The air carries memory. Separating one person's genetic contribution from another within a mixed sample requires an additional layer of analysis. It takes time. It takes precision, and Nanos was transparent about that reality. Results could take weeks, in the most complex scenarios, months, in the hardest cases, up to a year. A glove was also recovered from a roadside location approximately 2 miles from Nancy's home. It appeared to match the type visible on the suspect in the FBI-released footage. Its DNA was run through CODIS, the FBI's national criminal database, which holds approximately 22 million profiles. No match. Further analysis traced the glove's DNA to a nearby restaurant worker with no connection to the investigation. The glove was eliminated as a direct evidential link. The DNA found inside Nancy's home remains the center of everything. C.C. Moore is the chief genetic genealogist at Parabon Nanolabs in Virginia. She has helped solve more than 300 cases using DNA evidence. She is one of the most widely respected experts in this field in the country. And when the mixed DNA finding was announced, her response was not discouragement. It was hope. Careful, reasoned, experienced hope. She explained that a person holding a flashlight in their mouth, as the FBI footage suggests the suspect may have been doing to free both hands at Nancy's front door, does not hold that object without interruption. At some point, it comes out, and when it does, saliva transfers to the gloves. And when gloved hands touch a surface, a door, a wall, a countertop, anything, DNA follows. She said he would have immediately had his DNA all over the outside of that glove, and he had to have touched something. She recommended that investigators return to Nancy's home and conduct additional forensic swabbing, looking specifically for a rootless hair, a strand shed without its follicle, which still retains mitochondrial DNA. She said if they have not collected his DNA, it is still at that crime scene somewhere. And then she said something that the Guthrie family and everyone who has been praying for Nancy needed to hear. She said, "If I was the kidnapper, I would be extremely concerned right now, because using investigative genetic genealogy, he will be identified. Not might be, will be." That methodology, investigative genetic genealogy, is the same process that identified the Golden State Killer after 5 decades of investigation. Joseph James DeAngelo had committed at least 13 murders across California. Totus had his DNA at dozens of crime scenes and produced no match. He had never been convicted of anything that required his submission to the database. He had lived for decades as a retired police officer in Northern California, invisible to the system that should have found him. When investigators submitted crime scene DNA to GED Match, a database where private citizens have voluntarily submitted their genetic information for ancestry research, they found partial matches to distant relatives. Forensic genealogists built a family tree. They followed it backward through ancestry records and census data until it narrowed to a single individual. They followed DeAngelo to a parking lot, swabbed his car door handle, confirmed the match. He was arrested in 2018. He later pleaded guilty. He is serving multiple life sentences. Brian Kohberger, who murdered 4 University of Idaho students in November 2022, was identified the same way, through a knife sheath left at the scene, arrested within 2 months. In the Guthrie case, investigators have confirmed they are pursuing this exact methodology. And C.C. Moore, who has seen this process work more than 300 times, did not hedge when she spoke about where it leads. She said, "will." And that word, in the context of a family that has spent 53 days not knowing where their mother is, carries more weight than almost anything else that has been said publicly about this case. While the forensic work runs its course, investigators have been doing something else simultaneously. They have been mapping the neighborhood, building an accountable picture of every person who had a legitimate physical presence in Catalina foothills in the weeks before February 1st. FBI agents have returned to the neighborhood multiple times, each visit more specific than the last. They have asked about a neighbor who moved out shortly before Nancy disappeared, not as a named suspect, but as a variable that cannot be set aside in a case built entirely on local knowledge and advanced planning. A vacated home gives someone a potential observation point, a place to watch a street, to learn its rhythms, to understand when people leave and when they return, and what the neighborhood looks like at 2 in the morning. They have also been asking for names, not general observations about construction workers in the area, specific names, the name of every contractor and every worker active on job sites in that neighborhood during the critical window. A construction worker has a reason to be on a street for hours. Nobody questions a work truck parked along a quiet road in the early morning. Nobody looks twice at a person moving near an active job site. If someone was conducting surveillance of Nancy's home while appearing to have a legitimate reason to be in the neighborhood, a construction crew roster is exactly where the FBI would need to look. And then there is El Charro Cafe. In October 2025, Savannah Guthrie returned to her hometown of Tucson, Arizona for a Today Show segment. She sat down at El Charro, the oldest continuously owned Mexican restaurant in the U.S., open and beloved since 1922, with her mother Nancy and her aunt Annie. They shared a meal that probably had been shared in that same room across generations of their family. And Nancy looked at her daughter across the table and said the words that would later feel like a farewell that was never meant to be one. "It's so wonderful, just the air, the quality of life. It's laid back and gentle." That segment aired nationally in November 2025, less than 3 months before Nancy was taken. It was watched by millions of people, and after she disappeared, it was watched by millions more. A source told media outlets that there was significant internal reflection at NBC whether that segment had inadvertently placed Nancy in a position of vulnerability. Her face, her neighborhood, her connection to a famous daughter, broadcast to a national audience. FBI agents visited El Charro and questioned staff about the filming day, whether anyone had seemed out of place, whether anyone had lingered too long near the crew, whether anyone had seemed unusually interested in the family at the table in the private dining room. The common thread running through it all, the construction workers, the vacated property, the restaurant, is the same question, the one question that sits at the center of everything. How did whoever took Nancy come to know enough about her life, her home, her routines to plan this crime with the level of precision it required? The FBI is building the answer to that question, name by name, address by address, frame by frame. What has been called a breakthrough is not a single discovery. It is the place where multiple threads of a long and careful investigation have converged. The FBI's independent forensic analysis of the Nest camera hardware produced a sustained conclusion about January 11th. The Guthrie family publicly appealed for community attention to that specific evening. Sheriff Nanos confirmed the FBI's conclusion on record in a direct broadcast interview on March 23, 2026. That is not a rumor. That is not a leak. That is the county sheriff going on record with an investigative conclusion the FBI reached through its own forensic work. The DNA is under active genetic genealogy analysis, the same methodology that has brought down killers who believed they were beyond identification. The neighborhood is being mapped down to individual names, and the forensic team that recovered footage from a camera that should have held nothing, pulling residual data from a system that had already marked it for deletion, is the same team that produced the sustained conclusion about January 11th. Sheriff Manos said it plainly, "We have good evidence in front of us. We're not giving up." And somewhere in a home that has been too quiet for 53 days, Cameron and Christine Guthrie are still getting up every morning and choosing to believe that their mother can be found, still holding on to the words they put into a public statement because it was all they had left to give. "We miss our mom with every breath. We cannot grieve. We can only ache and wonder. Our focus is solely on finding her and bringing her home. We want to celebrate her beautiful and courageous life, but we cannot do that until she is brought to a final place of rest." A mother, a grandmother, a woman who loved the desert air and the laid-back gentleness of the city that made her. She is still out there, and the people looking for her have not stopped. The evidence is active, the case is moving, and the person who walked into that home left something behind, something that the science now says will eventually lead back to them. Nancy Guthrie deserves to come home. Her family deserves to stop aching and wondering, and this city, this community that she loved so deeply, has the power to help make that happen. If you have any information from the late evening of January 11th, from January 31st, or from the early hours of February 1st, please contact the FBI tip line at 1-800-CALL-FBI. No detail is too small. It may be the key that brings her home.